Good evening, or afternoon, or morning, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Linda Bell, and it's my honor as Provost and Dean of the Faculty to welcome you all to the inaugural event of Barnard's Big Problems, Making Sense of 2020 lecture series. Designed especially for the class of 2024, this lecture series is a new component of our first year experience program. First year experience introduces our incoming class to the intellectual life of the college in small seminar group settings, equips them with critical reading, discussion, and writing skills that cross disciplinary boundaries, and provides them with strong foundations for a successful academic career. So a very warm shout out and welcome to our nearly 700 first year students, the class of 2024. Beginning this spring and into the summer and fall months, we've witnessed the devastation of COVID-19 and alongside it, an uprising of voices against systemic and violent racism in our nation. This epical period of our history has been filled with sorrow, with hate, with powerful protest, and with an extraordinary combination of despair coupled at discrete moments with an uplifting sense of possibility and hope. This September, we find ourselves at the start of a new academic year like no other. Through this public lecture series and small group discussions, we hope to engage our first years, along with all our students and the greater Barnard community, with some of the urgent questions posed by this pivotal moment. What does this moment reveal about existing power structures, value systems, and the institutions that produce and replicate them? What forms of destabilization might we actually welcome as part of a long history of anti-racist and feminist activism? How do we care for and center communities who experience the pain and injustices of this moment most directly? And what might our world ideally look like as we move forward? Tonight, we ask our community to join us in examining 2020 in these multiple contexts. Our lecture this evening will be followed by a question and answer session in which our distinguished speaker will answer questions submitted by our Barnard first year students who've recently read two of our speaker's most powerful editorials. But before introducing our inaugural speaker for this evening, I want to thank the faculty who lead our first year experience program and who have worked tirelessly alongside President Bylock and her team and with me and my team to bring this series to fruition. So a heartfelt thanks to Pam Coburn, co-director of the first year seminar program, Cecilia Lee Spahn, associate director of the first year writing program, Lori Postlewaite, co-director of the first year seminar program, and Wendy Schorheim, director of the first year writing program, for their collective efforts, their partnership, and their vision. I am now so pleased to introduce our speaker for this evening, Roxane Gay. Roxane Gay is an author and cultural critic whose writing is unmatched in its honesty and nuance, and also widely revered. Her work garners international acclaim for its reflective, no-holds-barred exploration of feminism and social criticism. With a deft eye on modern culture, she brilliantly critiques its ebbs and flows with both wit and ferocity. Her collection of essays, Bad Feminist, is universally considered the quintessential exploration of modern feminism. NPR named it one of the best books of the year, and Salon declared the book trailblazing. Her powerful debut novel, An Untamed State, was longlisted for the Flaherty-Dunnan First Novel Prize. And in 2017, Roxane released her best-selling memoir, Hunger, a memoir of my body, which was called, and I quote, luminous, intellectually rigorous, and deeply moving by the New York Times. Roxane co-hosts Here to Slay with Tressie McMillan Cottom, a podcast with an intersectional perspective on celebrity, culture, politics, art, life, love, and more. She's also a contributing op-ed writer for the New York Times and was the co-editor of Pank and formerly the nonfiction editor at The Rumpus. Her writing has appeared in McSweeney's, The Nation, and numerous other publications. She was the first Black woman to ever write for Marvel, writing a comic series in the Black Panther universe called World of Wakanda. Please join me in a very warm welcome for Roxane Gay. Welcome.
Hello, first year students at Barnard. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening, and also kind of not a pleasure because the subject matter of this class is 2020. And this has been one hell of a year. It's actually been a terrible year. It's been the kind of year that writers write really tragic novels about, only we're living in it. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about how did we get to this place and how do we move beyond it? And like most people, I don't know that I have any wisdom on this matter because I too am just trying to get through it. But these are just some of the thoughts that I have been having lately as I think about all of the things that contributed to a year where the world is literally falling apart and we don't seem to know how to stop it. I've actually spent most of my adult life on college campuses, either as a student, a graduate student, a faculty member, or a public speaker. And on all of these campuses, I have seen the same story play out in largely the same ways. In any given university's glossy brochures, the ones with well-manicured green campuses and state-of-the-art facilities, there are smiling students with big teeth of all races and ethnicities. Administrations say the right things about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They have people whose entire job it is to make the campus environment more welcoming to marginalized students and faculty, and to better retain them, even though those people rarely have any power or any budget. But when you look closer, it becomes clear that there is more to the story. Campuses do a good job of making it seem like they are inclusive, welcoming environments. They do very little, however, to follow through on the promises that they make. And we see this also happening at all levels of government. We see it happening in corporate America and in nonprofits. Nobody has seemed to figure this out. I have spent most of my adult life on college campuses, and in every instance, the students and faculty do what they must to get through, but most of them are also unhappy. They feel isolated and unwelcome. They have the same stories about microaggressions and macroaggressions. They are expected to conform and assimilate to the institution rather than believe that the institution can truly create a place where they belong. I see the same students involved in the same social justice and community-oriented organizations, exhausting themselves to improve campus conditions, trying to change the world, providing so much emotional labor that is not their burden to bear. I imagine many of you listening to these words today are some of those very students. The faculty at these schools are either deeply involved in supporting these students while they are tokenized by the institution, or they are immersed in their work while they are tokenized by the institution, keeping their heads down, trying to focus on their careers, producing scholarly work, living the best professional lives that white colleagues tend to take for granted. When I visit campuses as a public speaker, I'm usually invited to a special meeting or meal with a select group of students. Inevitably, that select group of students is comprised of students of color and/or queer students. The glossy brochure suddenly comes to life and making it seem like the campus is so diverse that it's no problem at all to gather 10 or 15 students of color. In reality, I am likely spending time with the majority of the students of color on that campus. The institution is trying to tell an untrue story, but I also love these encounters. I love to hear the true stories of any given campus climate, and I always hear the truth. I hear about the very same things that were problems when I was first a college student more than 25 years ago. Part of being seen as part of a monolith, the bigotry of low expectations, few resources geared toward retention, few faculty of color, few students of color, biased grading, tokenization. Public intellectuals, writers, and other interesting thinkers are brought to campuses as part of splashy initiatives that administrations hope will absolve them of any long-term responsibility for creating a genuinely inclusive institution. They put up beautiful posters, and auditoriums fill with eager students and faculty and community members. And for an hour or two, we share our work and our opinions about the state of the world. We take questions, we sign books, we meet, we greet, and then we go back to our hotel rooms. And a week or two later, we do it all over again. I am fortunate enough to be at a place in my career where I can do these kinds of events, which I very much enjoy doing, and I get to hold institutions accountable in some small way. I can call out the concerns students raise with me. I can call out injustices that I hear about when someone emails me about what's really going on their campus just a few days before I arrive. In general, administrators look appropriately shamed when they're called out, but then I leave and I return to my life and they return to the status quo. It is exhausting to bear witness time and again to how futile diversity and inclusion efforts feel. Universities and corporations and nonprofits, they know what they need to do to create real, sustained change. They also know that they don't have to do anything to create real, sustained change. They can make half-assed, hollow gestures because marginalized groups have neither the power nor cultural capital to hold them accountable in the long term. It's exhausting to bring attention to mediocre attempts at creating change and institutional problems that further marginalize already marginalized groups, and know that whatever stand I have taken has only been afforded to me by an immense amount of privilege, and that the aftershocks of taking that stand will be marginal at best. We're up against a whole lot as we try to fight bigotry and make the world a better, safer, and more equitable place for as many people as possible. When something like a global pandemic reshapes the world, the enormity of the work we need to do becomes even more pronounced. And still, we're supposed to have hope. We're supposed to believe change is possible despite an overwhelming amount of evidence to the contrary. The issues we see on college campuses are symptoms of what ails the world beyond the ivory tower. I was, like many progressives, staggered by Donald Trump's election. I knew his presidency would be a disaster, and I have quite a vivid imagination, so I thought I could imagine the worst of what he might be capable of. Turns out I was not nearly imaginative enough. In 3.5 years, he has dismantled decency and decorum, checks and balances, dignity, and most social and political norms. He has pushed a horrifying, hate-filled agenda through with very little resistance. He has put a craven and an indifferent billionaire in charge of the Department of Education. Most of his cronies, in fact, have been given powerful positions for which they are aggressively unqualified. He has reshaped the courts for a generation at least. He has diminished America's global standing and has made us a mockery throughout most of the world, unless of course you're a dictator, in which case they love him because he's such an idiot. World leaders don't even bother hiding their disdain for him, and their honesty about his incompetence may be the only glimmer of hope. And all of this happened, of course, before the pandemic. The rank indifference Trump and his administration have demonstrated toward the American people is breathtaking. Nearly 200,000 people have died and more than 6 million people have been infected with the coronavirus. The very basic things people should do to keep themselves, their families, and communities safe have become politicized. Surviving the plague has inexplicably become a matter of survival of the fittest. Because it is Black and Brown people who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic, the current administration doesn't need to care. They willfully look the other way because they can and because voters allow them to. We're less than 2 months away from an election the president is openly trying to steal and probably is going to win. And though the president should lose, it's impossible to believe that he will, or that if he does, that he'll accept those results. Many of us have been in some form of isolation for 6 months or longer. We have not seen friends or family. We have not gone dancing. We haven't been to movies or to the theater or to parties. We have not worked in our offices. Our children have not gone to school. Nearness is now terrifying. Nothing is safe. It all feels kind of apocalyptic, and that's for people who are relatively well off. For the poor and working class, the essential workers, and the people on the front lines of this pandemic, the crisis is magnified. The economy is shattered. A housing crisis is looming. A debt crisis is looming. A student loan debt crisis is looming. A healthcare crisis is looming. This is a terrible story. Forgive me, I hate telling this story. And still, it does need to be told. To change the world, we need to face what has become of it. But there has been an unexpected development. On May 25th of this year, George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Floyd was suspected of using a counterfeit bill, and Chauvin decided to be judge, jury, and executioner. As is often the case these days, there is video of this corruption of due process. I try not to watch these videos anymore. I have seen enough death and the desecration of the Black body. I have seen too much of this. We all have. But for some reason, I decided to watch what happened to George Floyd to bear witness once again. In the end, it was the least I could do. For more than 8 minutes, Chauvin kept his knee on George Floyd's neck. He stared directly into the camera because he knew he could get away with murder in plain sight. He knew he would be supported because he was being supported by the 3 other police officers who stood by and did nothing to stop him. George Floyd begged for his life in front of several witnesses, and his pleas for mercy did not matter. He was 46 years old, 1 year older than me. He had a whole lot of life left to live, and that was taken from him. It was stolen. The video of George Floyd's murder told a story about America that we have known from 1619 until today. We have seen the fragility of Black life in all kinds of videos and images. We have endured a collective trauma that seems to be unending, but there has always been visual evidence of this fragility. When her son was murdered, Mamie Till asked for her son Emmett Till's casket to remain open. "I want the world to see what they did to my baby," she said. The haunting image of that young Black boy's body told a story. From the late 19th century well into the 20th century, there were lynching postcards, which are exactly what they sound like. Postcards featuring pictures of dead Black bodies, people who were victims of lynching, the strangest fruit. These postcards told a story, a condemnation. The image of Michael Brown's body left in the street for hours told a story. The video of Rayshard Brooks being murdered by police told a story. There are far too many names to list, or in truth, the recitation of these names yet again is too painful. What matters is that we know their stories. We see their stories. For those of us who are Black, we know that their stories could easily become our stories or the stories of our friends, our family, our neighbors. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, protests began not only across the United States, but around the world. The familiar story of the fragility of Black life had finally reached enough people, had finally been told with such casual brutality that the only possible response was to take to the streets despite a pandemic raging, to say enough, to shout Black Lives Matter, to demand accountability, to demand change. Hope has never been my ministry, mostly because I am more a realist than an optimist. But I know that something is happening. The world as we knew it has broken wide open. There is a before and an after, and the world will never again be what it once was. That sounds terrifying, but it is indeed an opportunity. I have never seen anything like the protests we have seen this year. I have never seen such a broad coalition of people recognizing what is at stake. People from all races and ethnicities are stepping outside of their comfort and complacency because they recognize that there is an urgency in this moment that cannot be ignored. George Floyd's death told a story, and I think that story was too familiar. Enough of us recognized that it is time to change the story that we keep telling over and over and over. We are having serious conversations about defunding the police and prison abolition. We are having serious conversations about erasing student loan debt and instilling a universal basic income, or at the very least, a $15 minimum wage. We are having serious conversations about universal health care as a right, not a privilege. We are opening our eyes to the grotesque inequalities that rise from a handful of people hoarding the majority of the world's wealth. My point is this: whether you're on a college campus, in a class, or in your hometown, or in Minneapolis or New York or any American city, it can seem like nothing changes and no one cares. And sometimes that is the truth, or at least a version of the truth. The truth is a complicated story, but it can change. It has to change if we have any hope of making the world a different, better place. The goal isn't utopia, but the goal certainly is acknowledging that we can do far better than we have, and that it will take a lot of hard work and a lot of discomfort from a great many people. And that is a question of when, not if, we rise to the occasion. So thank you.
Thank you, Roxane.
You're welcome.
My intro said that your words are always brutally honest, I think, and fierce. And you held up to the promise. So thank you. I only wish that we could be live and in person and you could experience the reaction of a real crowd to kind of hear your words, your very important words. So, maybe I can suggest that you come back one day when we are live and in person to give us all sort of that vantage point, if you will. So,
I will.
okay, great. I'm going to remind everyone on this call that my role here is to read through some of the questions that have been posed by our class of 2024 and have been sorted through by them, by some of their leaders, and by the faculty who run the first year experience program. And I've roughly speaking organized the questions into a kind of set of categories. I think if it's okay, I want to start with a question which is on the pandemic and discrimination in the pandemic. And I'll quote the question directly. So it says, we can spend our way to normalcy and capitalism will hold us close. These ads would have us believe. And that's a quote from your 2020 article in the New York Times entitled, "Remember, no one is coming to save us." The question asks, this quote speaks on the reassuring commercials, in quotes, produced during coronavirus, that it will end soon, that 2020 is just a bad year. But does this notion of capitalism's blinding impact also contribute to the comfortable lies created and fed to white people in regards to racism?
Absolutely. I think a great many people are very used to being coddled about any number of bigotries, from racism to homophobia to transphobia. I think a lot of times capitalism makes us feel better about ourselves and lets us think that the world's problems are not as severe as they are. And that's why it really is time to be more radical in our thinking and to really question the role of capitalism in our society. And that's a scary thing to say. It's a scary thing to wrap your mind around, because in a capitalist society, it's hard to even know where to begin to dismantle some of the systems that have contributed to the way the world is right now. But we do have to start asking those hard questions. I think we're seeing that capitalism is not actually a cure-all. And I am someone who has benefited from capitalism, and I suppose a part of me believes in capitalism. But it's very easy for me to say that when capitalism hasn't served you, when it has only harmed you. You have a vastly different perspective. And I just think that more of us have to be uncomfortable with the stark divide between those who capitalism has benefited and those who have been left behind. And until we reckon with that, I think a great many people are going to continue to suffer.
So I'll follow up with another question, which builds on that to a degree, or builds on your answer. And that is, do you think a cultural shift away from individualism, and granted individualism is not synonymous with capitalism, but the question is, do you think a cultural shift away from individualism is required in order to end systemic racism? And do you think such a shift is possible, and if so, how?
I don't know. I do know that we need to be less individualistic, not only to combat racism, but to combat really all bigotry. And I don't know if it's possible. I would like to believe that it is, but you know, the thing that has surprised me most about 2020 is not all of the racist nonsense that has happened. It's that people are unwilling to wear masks. I just would not have picked that as a thing that would happen, that people would not only risk the lives of others, but that people are willing to risk their own lives because of individualism and the sort of right to be free, as if wearing a mask is not freedom. And so, like, if we can't even get people to think of the collective to save their own lives, how do we get people to think of the collective to end racism? It just seems like such an impossible leap. And so I would hope that a collective way of thinking about our society would help. But for whatever reason, Americans seem really opposed to thinking about the collective, even though it is the collective and thinking about this country as a collective that led to the power that we had before Donald Trump and his administration pissed it all away. And so I don't know how we get back to that idea of thinking about the New Deal and thinking about just making sure that every American has healthcare and has a basic income and breathes clean air and gets around without needing a car. Like just basic things. I don't know how we get there, but sometimes I think that the world has to sort of blow up first, but we'll see.
Again, I'll quote from one of your articles. No one is coming to save us. Before we can figure out how to save ourselves from this travesty, we need to sit with that too. Was your 2000? It was your 2018 article. Mm-hmm. No one is coming to save us from Trump's racism. Mm-hmm. So the question from the first year student is, how do we sit with this? What are things we can do as individuals or groups or society to embrace the discomfort? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, how do I remember no one is coming to save us and imagine myself in the future? How do I find hope while recognizing that no one is coming to save us? Are there words that you can say that could give this student answers and hope?
I think that the most important thing to take from knowing no one is coming to save us is that we have to do that work ourselves. And so it feels pretty hopeless to say that, but it wasn't intended as such. It was intended as a call to action, recognizing that there is no sort of grand hero that is going to swoop in and make everything okay. Throughout the past 3.5 years, for example, we've seen a lot of people waxing nostalgically for Barack Obama, as if he could somehow fix everything. And we've also seen a bizarre revisionist history of George Bush, actually both George Bushes, who are war criminals. And so we have to abandon this idea that there is someone powerful and benevolent enough to make everything better. We also see it in these online memes of, if Jeff Bezos gave every Amazon employee $105,000, he would still have the wealth he began with. Like, it's not going to happen. We have to abandon that thinking. And instead, we have to ask ourselves, what can we do as individuals? And it's overwhelming to think about what we can do as individuals because it feels like we can't do anything. We're just individuals. But I'll give you a small example. In Los Angeles, there are a lot of where I live most of the time, there are a lot of community initiatives that have been started by individuals, just people who see a problem and are trying to solve it. And one of the biggest problems in LA is that there is a significant unhoused community. And so there is this group of young people that my assistant, Caitlin, who's incredible, is part of. And they have basically taken it upon themselves to feed the unhoused community at Echo Park Lake. And so they make sure that they have tents and clean water and food every single day and everything else they need. There are medical supplies and access to batteries for cell phone charging and the like. And on Saturdays, they go to MacArthur Park and they also feed anyone who is hungry. They put food in these community refrigerators that have popped up all around LA. And these are just a bunch of young people who, quite frankly, don't have a pot to piss in and have still decided to work together and solve this problem because the city government in Los Angeles is doing absolutely nothing to address this significant and unacceptable problem. And every single day, I just think if they can do that, then I certainly can get off my ass and do something. And part of it is, yes, I can give them money and make sure they can buy all of the food that they need to buy, but also I can canvass for a candidate. I can make a video about getting out to vote, whatever. It just doesn't take that much infrastructure. It just takes initiative and caring to really do something. So pick a problem and then just start working on it without worrying about the end game. Just know that you're trying to move towards something. And that's how I find, if not hope, that's how I find a less of a sense of helplessness and hopelessness when I know that no one's coming to save us.
In some of your work, you talk about online activism, and in some instances, you call it performative. So there's a number of questions that the students raise. One is, we talk a lot about performative activism, but often as an alternative, that isn't widely shared. What are the next steps to take to truly implement societal change? How can we as individuals, perform activism in a way that will support the movement?
You have to walk the walk. You have to do more than make your Instagram avatar a black square. Like people were doing that earlier this summer and it was just fucking ludicrous. You have to do things that matter, whether it's making a contribution to a mutual aid fund or a bail fund, or volunteering your time, because a lot of people, especially college students, don't have extra money, and you don't need to have extra money to help, but you have to get up and do something. And you also have to be willing to call out bigotry when you see it. A lot of times, white people love to come up to me and tell me about their racist relatives, and I don't know why. I don't need to know about your grandfather. He's just, let him be a racist ass cracker. That's not my business. But instead of telling me about your racist relative, why don't you have a conversation with that racist relative? When your friend makes a sexist or transphobic joke, call them out. And if they aren't going to change, then cut them out of your life. Yeah, you actually have to make really difficult decisions sometimes. And so I just think it's about walking the walk. And I also think being realistic and human, like you're not going to change the world every single day, but at least try and take the time that you need to rest when you do. I mean, so many people drive themselves into the ground trying to save the world, and that's not helpful either, because you need to be strong and have the energy to keep fighting the good fight. But a lot of the changes that we need to make are not as overwhelming as they might seem.
So maybe, I'm not putting words in your mouth, so excuse me, I'm just trying to synthesize. So these small micro acts of of real compassion and care and activism and rebellion, in a sense, can potentially be our source of hope because they're necessary and because they spark things. Is that fair?
Yeah, I do think that's fair. I think it's a place to start. While we're also working on like the bigger changes that need to happen, like getting Donald Trump out of office, getting a $15 minimum wage or higher, getting Medicare for all. Like these are things that are going to take a lot of time and a lot of political nonsense. But until we get there, what are things that we can do as individuals who may not have a lot of power or capital? And so I try to just think of it in both ways. Like, yes, we need to vote. You know, a lot of times people are like, go vote. Yeah, you need to vote. Absolutely. And you need to vote in every election. And you need to vote down ticket as well as the federal elections. But small gestures add up after a while. And it's a place to start. It's a place to feel like, okay, maybe I'm doing a little something.
Yeah, I mean, in my life, I found small gestures can send powerful signals.
And what may be a small gesture to you might be a huge gesture to someone else, you know, and it's important to remember that as well.
Another question, let's kind of move it to a little bit towards COVID and the pandemic asks, and it quotes again your 2020 article, the disparities that normally fracture our culture are becoming even more pronounced as we decide collectively what we choose to save, what deserves to be saved. The question the student asks is, what can we do on a national scale to provide extra support to communities that have been most negatively affected by COVID?
We can make sure that those communities have year-round health care. The reason that a lot of Black and Brown people are succumbing to COVID is because they have comorbidities that are particularly vulnerable to COVID symptoms. And if they had adequate health care, they would not have those comorbidities. And so one of the key things we can do is start to make sure that people in our communities have health care, access to health care, the ability to pay for it. And until we address the healthcare problem in this country, we're going to be seeing this kind of disparity of outcomes with each progressive pandemic that comes along. This is the first real global pandemic that the world has seen since 1917. There have been, of course, Ebola and Zika and other outbreaks, but nothing has been on this level. And now that the door has been opened, especially because it was probably a man-made virus, it's going to open again. And so we have to start by making sure that people are as healthy as possible. We need to figure out a national way of mandating hygiene compliance. And then making sure people have those masks. Like one of the biggest problems to this day is that there aren't a lot of N95 masks. And, you know, like if you have a little bit of money, you can go on eBay. My mom has stage 4 lung cancer, so I went the eBay route because like for her, N95 masks are not optional. It's the only way that she's going to get through this. But what about the people who can't afford to go spend a ludicrous amount of money on these masks? We have to have a federal distribution plan, and it has to be enforced, the compliance with wearing these masks. And businesses have to enforce these rules. Some businesses do and some don't. And until we see universal enforcement, if this country just shut down for 2 weeks, we would have this under control. But again, it's that individualism thing. Every state is like, I'm going to do it my own way. Okay, well, here we are in month 7.
I think you will have a lot of supporters on this call about the absence of a unified strategic national policy to combat this thing. And as an economist, I can say it is a disgrace that this country doesn't have some form of health, universal health care.
It just makes no sense. It just makes no sense that people are unwilling to have other people get the ability to go to a doctor, I'll never get it. I mean, there are lots of things Americans do that I'm like, well, I think that's fucked up, but I get where you're coming from, sort of. But with healthcare, I'll never understand it.
Me neither on that one for sure. So again, in the "No One Is Coming to Save Us from Trump's Racism" article, you mentioned that voting will not solve our problem, given that many American values are reflected by our current administration, who, after all, won the election by an electoral vote. How would you suggest that we fight these ideas without making them a part of the performative and curated messages shown by the media? How can college students like us, the student asked, raise awareness to reality without it turning into trends or hashtags?
I don't know. That's a good question. What we see as reality, the people who disagree with us don't. They see their reality as reality. And like, we're convinced that we're right, but so are they. There is just a fundamental ideological divide happening, and I don't know if it can be bridged. But I think that our attention should be directed not to the people who are diametrically opposed. And by that, I mean Trump supporters. They're unreachable. They are not the goal because they're not conservatives. That's not conservatism. That's just racism. And you can dress it up any way you want, but these are racist people who are very happy to see a racist in chief in the White House. Instead, the people we have to reach are progressives and people who stayed home in 2016 or who are considering staying home this year because the Democratic platform is not progressive enough. And they're right, it isn't progressive enough. They have decided that going the centrist route is the most effective chance that they will have for being elected. And they may be right, I don't know. But how do we convince them to vote this year and to support the Democratic platform while also pushing the Biden-Harris ticket further left and pushing all Democratic leaders further left? I think we have to fight for eradicating the DNC because the DNC is irrevocably broken and is too invested in politics as usual to really allow for change. I mean, when you look at what happened with the Democratic convention, it was a fine convention, except that we didn't hear from AOC for more than 60 seconds. We didn't hear from Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Lauren Underwood. There are all these amazing freshmen in Congress right now who are really exciting and who are doing amazing things at a policy level and who have really energetic constituents. And I think that it would behoove us to hear more from them and to learn from them. And until we can sort of create space for them to participate in the political process as much as the Biden, Harris, and the legacy politicians who have been in office for so long, I don't know what we're going to do. But again, I think our audience is how do we reach progressives and people who are checked out and feeling disenfranchised? Because they're reachable because they care. They care enough to have that stance. People who are going to vote for Trump again, I just don't care about them. They cannot be reached, and they are all sick, and they need medicine.
So small acts of activism, so small encounters with activism. I mean, activists vote, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Can you be an activist and not vote in the coming presidential election?
There are a lot of people who call themselves activists who might not vote, and far be it for me to tell them who or what they are, but I think that it's a betrayal of everything that matters to not vote. It really is. Voting feels so useless sometimes. I get it. It just feels so desperately useless, but it's not. Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes, and I suspect that Joe Biden will also win the popular vote. So it matters. It matters. It just matters. And and even if it doesn't matter at the federal level, especially for people in New York, California, Massachusetts, like these places that we know are going to go Democrat, um, the down ballot tickets are really important. Like who is running for your school board and shaping the education of your children. Like just today, there was that report released that a significant number of people under 40 don't know about the Holocaust, and that 6 million people, 6 million Jewish people were exterminated. And given that genocide is happening again right now, it would behoove us to know who's on our school boards and who is running for district attorney and who is running for judge and sheriff in our towns. And so it's just important to be educated, to read up on the initiatives that are currently under consideration in your voting areas, and just making those decisions, participate in civic life. Even if you write someone in, which I don't think is effective, but you know what, like live your truth. Even if you write something in, it's better than doing nothing.
So another quote from one of your articles is, some white people act as if there are two sides to racism, as if racists are people we need to reason with. So this student asks, how do we approach racists? And ignorance is sometimes not the only issue, as her previous article states.
Mhm.
So if not with reason, then how do we ethically engage with racist rhetoric ideology? Or how can we right their wrong? What can we do?
I actually don't think that we engage with racists. I have nothing to say to them. They're not going to change their minds. Every once in a while, you'll read about some skinhead who found the light, but for every skinhead who found the light, there are 500 who are more than happy to stay in the dark. I think we have to, that's not the right question. There's this persistent idea that if we just say the right combination of things, racists are going to unlearn their racism. They're not. They don't see people of color as human. And I just don't know what more I could say to articulate my humanity to get them to see me as human. Now, there are some less racist people that might be able to be reached. And, the best way to reach anyone who has a differing viewpoint is to try and recognize how that viewpoint was developed and try not to belittle them or shame them, because nobody responds well to being belittled or shamed. But so much of racism is so deeply ingrained that I honestly don't know how to reach those people. And I say that as someone who has lived most of my life in deeply racist places. I'm from Nebraska, and I was at Purdue until last year. And Lafayette, Indiana is one of the most shockingly racist places I've ever lived. Like Klan members would just drive around town with their little flags, and they were proud. Like, how do I reach that guy? Like I have got more things to do. My schedule is full. So I think it's a question of how do we work around them? How do we diminish their power and their reach?
Exactly. So another, picking up on the same theme, and again, our students are close readers. So I'm reading verbatim, and they're all quoting all of your articles. So the quote is, Black people share the truth of their lives, and white people treat those truths as intellectual exercises.
Mm-hmm.
I worry that I may engage in issues in non-productive ways. What do you believe privileged people can do to engage with issues in more meaningful and productive ways?
Well, one of the first things we need to do is decenter ourselves. So many privileged people think that it's enough to be aware that not everyone has privilege. And like, if you do that, oh my God, I've done the work. No, you have to decenter yourself and cede your platform to other people, and do so in a non-condescending way. You see a lot of people like talking about, I want to help the voiceless find their voices. Like, no, you don't, because no one's voiceless. You really have to rethink how you approach any of this and say, I want to stop using my voice so that someone else can. And I think when we start to step back and decenter ourselves, a lot of good can come from that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you just two more general questions.
Okay.
One student writes, I want to touch on one of your most popular works. Is there anything from your well-cited anthology, Bad Feminists, that you would change or update, knowing where we are in society today?
Mm-hmm. No, I wouldn't. I'm not a psychic, and so I wrote the pieces I wrote to the best of my ability at the time that I wrote those pieces. If and when I update the collection, certainly I'm going to update my thinking where applicable. I said some vaguely kind things about Bill Cosby. Whoops. I am definitely going to clarify that he's a serial rapist. And I think I also said something laudatory about Bill Clinton, which, yikes. So I'm definitely going to take, just hold myself accountable for those missteps that, I'm not psychic, so I'm not going to beat myself up, but I think it's important to acknowledge, like that new information has come to light. And I think, if anything, I just want to make sure that in a new version, and there will be a new version, a 10-year version of the book, I have more time to write now. So the one thing that I would do in an updated version is just take more time. That when I wrote those essays, it was very early in my career, and I was not given the time to really think. I'm very proud of everything I wrote. I stand behind everything I wrote. But I didn't have the time to think and be as nuanced and as, even though I do think it's fairly nuanced, but to go as deeply as I wanted and as I, can. And so I just look forward to bringing more rigor to anything I do to update it. And in, all the work, I just try to improve with everything I do. And so I can look at those essays. I know what the flaws are, and hopefully I'll address them in the next version.
And that's the lesson of a good intellectual and academic, someone who kind of builds on their body of work and improves as time goes on. So it's a good lesson for our aspiring academics.
Absolutely.
So the second question, the real general throw out question is, if you were able to directly influence policy in Washington, so let's say, for a day, a month, a year, 4 years, how would you implement concrete ways to educate people and combat racism? Well, how would you outline what you would do?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm sorry, that's a very deep and challenging question.
It's a very challenging
question, but I'm sure you can enlighten us on that.
I would start with reparations. I think until this country acknowledges the original sin and makes amends for it, nothing we do with regards to racism will matter. The 1619 project that was led by Nicole Hannah-Jones has really gotten a lot of historians in their feelings, because it posits that racism and the ills of racism can be traced back to 1619 and the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. There are some flaws with the work, but they're right. Pretty much every problem that Black people deal with today, and people of color more broadly in the United States, can be traced to slavery. And until we have a real reckoning with that, and until material recompense is made, until reparations is not only, I think, about cutting people a check, but it's a start, until we address how Black people have been discriminated against in terms of housing, healthcare, education, safety, we're never going to have a real reckoning. So we have to start with that. And it has to be a serious conversation, and it has to be, I think, probably by executive order, because we're never going to get Congress to put together an adequate reparations package. But we need reparations. And yeah, acknowledge the original sin.
Okay, I think that's a good spot to conclude. We could go on for a long time, but people have places to go, I'm sure, including you, and things to do. I really do. We really do appreciate it, Barnard. You're agreeing to inaugurate this new series. Appreciate the provocative honesty of the depth of thinking, and the body of work, collective work that's gone into the way in which you are viewing some of the most pressing problems today. So thank you again, Roxane. Really.
Oh, thank you, Linda. It's been great to be here, and I hope that you guys have a great year. I know it's challenging this year, but I still hope you have a great year because college is fun.
It is a wonderful thing.
It is.
And thank you to everyone who's joined us here today in this first of our Big Problems Making Sense of 2020 series. I'm reminding you that our next event will be on Wednesday, October 14th at 6:30 with author and journalist Linda Villarosa. So we'll resume some probing discussion. Thank you all. We'll sign off now.